All right, now the South Africa Tomorrow Investment Conference 2018 kicked off this afternoon in New York City in the United States. And of course, it is the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's first trip to one of the financial capitals of the world since assuming office. The conference is being held as a partnership between the South African public and private sectors. We do have not only the Finance Minister, but indeed the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, is there, as well as key partners trying to drum up support for the President's investment drive. They're sending the message of South Africa being an attractive investment destination and open for business. We'll bring you interviews with those two principals. And in fact, we cross over now to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Good evening to you, our time. And Sherwin, of course, you do have these interviews with the ministers. And really the message is come to South Africa, invest, invest, invest.
Absolutely, Bongani. The message is come to South Africa and invest in that. They're open for business. But it's also, there's an air of frankness in the room. There's an air of honesty in the room about the dire situation the current economy finds itself in. Of course, two terms of negative growth. Of course, a technical recession. The Minister and the Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, having very frank and open discussions in the opening plenaries of this conference, but really also trying to build on the momentum coming up, of course, out of the medium-term budget statement just a couple of weeks ago, and that all-important investment conference that was initiated by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Part of the discussion here, of course, will be on state-owned enterprises. As you know, they're in flux, a lot of difficulties facing South African Airways, Eskom, the SABC that is facing retrenchments, and the man of the moment in that regard, certainly, is none other than Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. Sir, good to see you. Former Finance Minister, I think a great get to have this discussion. Your reaction to the opening plenary, very frank, very honest, a bit of humour from the new Finance Minister.
Well, I think that's who we are in South Africa. We are very frank with our friends and interested parties around the world. And equally, we are very hopeful and optimistic and full of hope for the future of our country as well, notwithstanding some of the economic challenges that we face at the moment. And here we are talking to investors who have put billions of dollars into government debt or SOE debt, equally in the stock exchange, which means that it enables South African companies to raise funds in this kind of way. So I think about 40% of the JSE share issue is in the hands of foreigners. And thirdly, it's foreign direct investment into our country as well. So all of us are meeting different businesses that are interested, either in increasing their investment or contemplating new investments in the country as well.
Minister, you'll agree that, in a sense, and some people say this, you're literally coming to New York with a gun at your head, right? I mean, you're not growing, the economy is not growing, there's a bloated civil service, there's a lot of talk about how you deal with this huge annual wage bill. The SOEs are in crisis. There's a broad cloud of corruption and many layers of South African society, particularly at the municipal and local government level. Unemployment just went up. You saw stats SA, an uptick of 0.5% to 27.5%. You also have elections next year, which brings a whole cloud of political uncertainty. How difficult is it really to make that case, to say, come bring your money to us, we're still going to be a good bet moving forward?
Fairly easily, because under President Ramaphosa, we have a clear and new direction. There's no doubt that corruption and state capture has done a huge amount of damage, both to our institutions and to our economy more broadly as well. Secondly, I think both the speakers, the governor and the Minister of Finance, pointed out the global context in which we are operating, which isn't very favorable to emerging markets. And of course, we have things that are peculiar to our own country. And there we've had remarkable and new leadership, which says remove barriers of that constrain businesses from doing what they need to do. Secondly, create more certainty in the policy area, the mining charter being the one instance. Thirdly, recognizing that we need investment in our country and the work that the investment envoys have been doing, and the very successful investment conference that took place last Friday in Johannesburg as well, which got approximately 300 billion rands announced as investments, either current or investment to actually come. And that's the beginning of a process, not the end of a process. And there's generally a sense of hope in the country. So yes, economies from time to time will get into difficulty, either for global reasons, like in 2008-9, the Great Recession, or a combination of reasons, both global and domestic as well. But I think given hard work and urgency, we'll get through that and reach a more successful plane at the end of the day.
Minister, part of the narrative here is about how South Africa's current administration is cleaning shop. We talk about the reconfiguration of state-owned enterprises. You've been in the throes of changing various boards at these state-owned enterprises. You were also, as Finance Minister, in the throes of trying to change the leadership at the South African Revenue Service. We are hearing now that Tom Moyane has been fired. What is your reaction to that?
Well, that's been in the President's hands, so I think it's good to have some certainty in that area so that the Minister of Finance can now appoint a new commissioner. The Revenue Service is a very vital part of our fiscal and economic set of institutions. If it works well, we have less difficulty, we have more revenue coming in, and that actually makes a huge difference to the way in which we balance our fiscal accounts. As far as repairing other institutions are concerned, that's well on the way. There's no magic wand that's going to get us to a better future. So there are new boards, new management. There's a new sense of urgency about cleaning up the corrupt elements. And that's not easy because there's a fight-back element in some of that work as well. But equally, we are not only attending to today's problems, but looking ahead. And that's what the Minister of Finance was beginning to refer to. In other words, what's the new shape that each of these SOEs could take, so that will make them financially sustainable and independent of any financing from the government. But it's going to take this transition period to actually get there.
We have 1 minute. Let's just unpack a little bit about what the Finance Minister said about the reconfiguration. He talked about SAA, he talked about Eskom, perhaps not, in terms of separating transmission from distribution, and then, of course, he threw it your way as the room erupted in laughter. What's the next step for you?
Well, as I said, each of the SOEs have to attend to the current problems, make sure that we reach some level of stability, and at the same time plan the future for the next 5 or so years. So certainly, across the globe, energy utilities are not vertically integrated any longer. In other words, generation, transmission, and distribution take different shapes in different places. Disaggregating them in one way or the other is the direction that the energy markets are actually going into throughout the world. Eskom is looking at its own plans. By the end of November, they will tell government what their proposals are, and then government will make some decisions in that regard. Similarly, whilst we have financial difficulties at SAA, there's a lot of corruption to clean up there as well. And in many of these instances, we have large layers of middle management that we will have to look at very carefully and with a greater sense of urgency as well.
Minister, always good to see you. You have your work cut out for you, certainly, not just over the next 2 days here in New York, but certainly on your return to South Africa. Always good to see you. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Pravin Gordhan is South Africa's former Finance Minister, the current Public Enterprises Minister. And just to recap, Bongani, on what Tito Mboweni, the Finance Minister, said inside that room on South African Airways, close it down, start a new airline. If you want national colours on it, we can do that. But he literally asked the room if anyone in the room would be willing to invest money in the failing South African Airways, and the answer from the silence was a resounding no. He also talked about the reconfiguration of Eskom, separate transmission from generation, form a national grid company, and have a series of power producers that includes Eskom. I'm working on getting you that Tito Mboweni interview. Do stay with us.